In fact, there were three central pillars of the Islamic Revolution: death to America, death to Israel, and the hijab, the Islamic head covering that all Iranian women would have to wear. But for those decades since the Islamic Revolution, Iran, or the regime in Iran, was a very aggressive regional actor. It built a network of terror proxy armies around the region, including Hezbollah and Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, militias in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen. It supported the regime of Bashar Assad in Syria, and it created this auxiliary force, I guess you could call it that, called the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Quds Force, which was headed up by a man named Qasem Soleimani, who was really Iran's most probably deadly, but I also should say really strategically astute battlefield commander. And Soleimani built up the Quds Force, and the Quds Force worked with all these other terrorist armies around the region in order to create bloodshed and mayhem, but also to expand the Islamic Revolution from Tehran out into the Middle East, into the region, and take advantage of conditions in other countries, both conditions that were created by the Islamic Republic itself and conditions that have been created by civil wars and bloodshed and instability, to begin to take over countries like Syria and Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, and then Gaza and the West Bank. And that while they were doing that, they were also engaged in building up an illicit nuclear program with the goal of developing nuclear weapons. And they took to the streets, millions of them saying, "President Obama, are you with us or are you with the dictator?" And the regime cracked down heavily on them. President Obama reached out to the Ayatollah, wrote a letter and said, "Let's start negotiating over your nuclear program." And all the while, Congress had put in place, on a bipartisan basis, a series of these very punishing sanctions. Major concession of both the interim agreement and the final agreement was that for the first time, the United States gave Iran the enrichment capability that Iran needs in order to develop nuclear weapons, despite the fact that there have been 5 UN Security Council resolutions that were actually supported by China and Russia, denying Iran the right and the capability to enrich on their soil. This becomes very important as we get into the future negotiations. So 2015 agreement, very controversial. I'll just say, for the sake of full transparency, I oppose the agreement. I can tell you why as we discuss more and more of this issue. But the agreement ended up being passed. There wasn't a treaty, so President Obama never submitted it to the Senate for ratification. It was an executive agreement. And almost all Republicans opposed it, and 29 Democrats at the time of the Senate and the House opposed it. And that really laid the predicate for what came next when President Trump came into office. President Trump, he ratcheted up the sanctions in something called the maximum pressure campaign, really drove the Iranian economy on its back. And in 2018, President Trump withdrew from the agreement because of what he considered its fatal flaws, the fact that it gave enrichment capability to Iran that it could use to build nuclear weapons, and also because the restrictions on the Iranian nuclear program, which were actually very good and very tight restrictions in the short term, all those restrictions would sunset or disappear through the life of the agreement. And some key restrictions start disappearing in 2025, and most of them are gone by 2031. Iran would also have gotten $1 trillion worth of sanctions relief under that agreement. So Trump withdraws from the agreement. Trump then kills Qasem Soleimani. Remember, I mentioned his name. He was the head of the IRGC Quds Force. And Bush wouldn't do it. Obama wouldn't do it. They were too afraid there would be World War III. Trump takes him out when Soleimani works with the Iraqi Shiite militias. They kill a U.S. contractor, and then they plan to rush the U.S. embassy in Baghdad. Trump warns them. They move ahead. He takes out Qasem Soleimani in a joint operation with Israeli intelligence, with Mossad. And the Trump administration ends. Joe Biden comes in. Joe Biden says Trump made a huge mistake by withdrawing from the 2015 agreement. I want to go back in it. So he works over the next 4 years to try get back in it. He stops enforcing the sanctions. The Iranians don't fear Biden, So they massively expand their nuclear program, and they go from low enriched uranium to then 20% to 60% to 84%. I'll explain those terms if you're interested.
Yes, please.
And they start experimenting with uranium metal for a warhead. They install thousands of advanced centrifuges. They're pocketing the sanctions relief, but they don't fear Joe Biden. So there's no concern about the use of American military power. October 7th happens. The Israelis respond to that vicious attack by Iran-backed Hamas by launching a significant counteroffensive. And over the course of about a year and a half, they decimate Hamas. They severely degrade Hezbollah. Hezbollah is really weakened, so they're not able to ride to the rescue of Bashar Assad. The Assad regime goes down. Iran loses its most important ally in the region. And then the Israelis are working closely with the Trump administration on the nuclear side. Trump says that to begin with, I want to do a deal. He instructs his lead negotiator, Steve Witkoff, to go to Amman to negotiate with the Iranians. There's 5 rounds of negotiations. The Iranians reject a very generous offer that Trump puts on the table. And then Trump greenlights an Israeli strike over a 12-day war. The Israelis really in pretty incredible fashion take out the senior leadership of the Revolutionary Guards, Ministry of Intelligence. They take out the majority of Iran's nuclear sites. They really decimate the regime's core capabilities, take out about 60% of their missile launches, 50% of their ballistic missile capability, 30 to 40% of their ballistic missile production capability. And then there's one nuclear site that remains. It's called Fordow. It's 80 meters buried under a mountain, heavily fortified. It's an enrichment facility where Iran can develop nuclear weapons. The Israelis can do some damage to it, but everybody knows the only country that can destroy that is the United States of America. And Trump orders a strike where American B-2 bombers drop 30,000-pound massive ordnance penetrators, 12 of them, through the air shafts at the most vulnerable part of the facility, and do significant damage to Fordow. And we're sort of left where we are now, where everybody's fighting over the battle damage assessment about how much damage was done and how much was not done. We can certainly talk about that because obviously a lot of it gets politicized. So I'll end there. I will say just one other thing to your point. The Iran issue was a bipartisan issue for a number of years. All of these sanctions that were passed with overwhelming numbers, 98-2 in the Senate, 100-0, overwhelming votes in the House, strong support from Republicans and Democrats. And it was really, the issue I think became very politicized when President Obama did the 2015 deal, where Republicans almost entirely opposed it, and almost all Democrats except for 29 supported it. It was at that point that everything became very political. So Andy, sorry for the long answer, but I just wanted to provide as much context as possible for the rest of our discussion.
Ladies and gentlemen, hot salt from Firecracker Farm is the real deal. It's not just heat, it's flavor that elevates everything that you cook. The best thing to happen to food since fire. That's a bold statement, but I'm going to go ahead and agree with that. It's delightful. One of the best things about this brand is there's a real person behind it. His name is Alex, and he makes these in small batches, so it's not always easy to get. You don't want to miss out. All of the flavors are great. I have tried all of them. You really can't go wrong. Seriously, try it on everything. Steaks, vegetables, everything in between. I love cooking. I like cooking at home. I don't like putting sauces and overbearing things on the things that I cook, so I tried a little bit of the salt. And if I'm being honest, I tried a little bit too much the first time. It was a little spicy. So I had to back it off a little bit, and it made everything that I cook at home taste better. So it's an easy addition to the things that I already make. It tasted amazing. I was using the product for well over 6 months before Alex reached out to present as the sponsor for Change Agents. Easy peasy. I was already doing it, no additional time, a touch point with it in my personal life. I can talk about it from personal experience. Love what the brand stands for. Love what the brand was founded around. Enjoy the person who founded the brand. I mean, this is a match made in heaven. Get out of the comfort zone of what you can get in the grocery store. Go online to Firecracker Farm and use the code IRONCLAD for 15% off of your first order. You're going to be shocked at how much more of a flavor it brings out in what you cook.